Nation of Fitin10, welcome to day 14. We are officially 20% into the challenge. 1/5 goes by fast, right? It goes by really, really fast. And for those of you who are sending me your dietary feedback, this is great. Keep it up. For those of you who are not, I'm going to highly encourage you to do it. It makes all the difference. Trust me, you don't want to come to your first scan and then have me ask you, let me look at your eating journal. You're in this challenge, let's dive into it. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's far from perfect, send it in to me. Let's start working on it and let's begin to progress more, because I know that you are capable of more. Okay? A little bit of pressure is good. A lot of accountability is good. Well, even a little bit of accountability. Okay, today I'm going to talk about carbohydrates. Of course, we talked a little bit about the benefits of having carbohydrates, but I'm going to break down carbohydrates basically into 3 different types. And so we're all familiar with sugar. This is one type of carbohydrate. The second type of carbohydrate is starch. But starch can really just be thought of as sugar as well. And the third type is fiber, and this can be broken down into soluble and insoluble fiber. So let's start off with the second one I mentioned, sugar, because those are the very small units of carbohydrate. These are either what we call monosaccharides, so individual units of sugar, or maybe they're disaccharides. And you might see things on labels, or you may have heard of things like lactose or galactose or sucrose or dextrose or any of these things, glucose. These are all types of sugars, and they have the fastest, fructose would be another example, they have the fastest entry, or the faster of all 3 of the carbohydrates, the faster or the fastest entry to barrier into the bloodstream. And so this is why we're often told to minimize sugar, because we don't want to have, as I mentioned before a couple videos ago, we don't want to have this huge influx of sugar in the bloodstream, because it's not healthy. Let me be more specific, it's toxic. It will kill us if your blood sugar levels go too high or too low. It's going to kill us. So it's got to be in a very small range, and so the body's going to do what it has to do to regulate that. And if your sugars go too high, your body's got to send that sugar somewhere. So it's either going to go to your liver, your muscles, or it's going to go to body fat, essentially. The second type of carbohydrate we have is starch, and these are chains of sugar, and this is going to be slower digesting depending on the type of carbohydrate. We can have fast digesting chains of sugar and slower digesting chains of sugar. But starches in general are slower digesting than individual units of sugar, because the body has to break down those chains of sugar. So what's an example of a starch? Bread, pasta, rice, oatmeal, yams, potato. What's an example of a sugar? Something that is primarily sugar-based. A lot of fruit is sugar-based. Of course, I think we all know that things like fruit juices, well, this would obviously be coming from fruit, but sometimes they are fortified with, fortified would be the right word. There's added sugar to them. Of course, we're all familiar with all too familiar with many forms of junk food, whether it's cookies or candies or chocolate or pop or these types of things. These are all going to be very quick forms of, these are all going to be very large forms of sugar. So this is why often we're told, let's try to stick with more starch. But of course, as I've mentioned before, if you have things like fiber and or protein and or fat with carbohydrates, you slow down the release of the carbohydrate, period. Okay, this is one reason why I want you to have a mixed meal. Number 3 is fiber. Okay, this is the third type of carbohydrate. Now, there's soluble and there's insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber basically goes right through you. Doesn't go through any digestion. It basically just gets passed through from your mouth all the way to the other end. Insoluble fiber, soluble fiber, the other type of fiber, this is a kind of an interesting one. This is something that will go all the way to your intestinal tract, and actually in the large intestine, bacteria will utilize it as a source of fuel and will convert it into short chain fatty acids. So soluble fiber has some calorie cost. Okay, that is, soluble fiber will contribute to your overall calories, but insoluble fiber will not, because it's just passing right through you. Starch and sugar are going to have that regular amount, which is about 4 calories per gram. Okay, so whether we're talking about 10 grams of sugar or 10 grams of starch, it's going to be equal in calorie content. If we're talking about 10 grams of soluble fiber, that's going to count for 0. And if we're talking about 10 grams of, if we're talking about 10 grams of insoluble fiber, that's going to be worth 0. If we're talking about 10 grams of soluble fiber, we're looking at about, on average, and I say on average because not all soluble fiber is the same, we're looking on average about 20 calories. It's kind of interesting. Generally speaking, I will say to you, just keep things easy to account for. And of course, MyFitnessPal is doing this. I just count fiber as carbohydrates, even though really it's not. Okay, it does fall in the category of carbohydrate because it has very similar chemical structure to sugars and starches, but ultimately it's got a much lower calorie cost, especially if we're talking about insoluble fiber. All right, so very, very brief, very, very simple. Let's get to the message of the day here. And what is the message of the day? Well, I think you all know this, but I'm going to say it anyways. You can't find time. You've got to make time for what matters. If it really matters to you, you will find the time. Yes, you will find time, but you'll make the time. You will make time. You will make time, not find time. You will make the time. I was having this conversation with my mom the other day, and I'm like, Mom, if you just exercise with weights, and she's got some weights at home. She's actually got a cage at home with barbell and everything. I said, if you just did half an hour 3 times per week, that would be less than 1%. So she did an hour and a half exercise, it'd be less than 1%. I said, Mom, you can find less than 1% of your week. You can find 1% of your week to exercise. Because of course my mom has these reasons why she can't, or why it's very hard. So we just got to decide, okay, I'm going to put the time here, and I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this, but I really want you to do this when it comes to your food as well, because I know a lot of you, not all of you, but I know a lot of you are still struggling with this. So you need to put the time in to planning and preparing your food in advance, okay? Believe me, the earlier you do this, the quicker you are going to be on your feet to making progress, and the closer you're going to be towards your 30% fat loss goal, okay? All right, positive energy, positive vibes, believe in yourself, and for the love of God, give some gratitude, and I'll talk to you all very soon. See you guys.